All right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Alan Burgos from the hashtag WokwithLan channel. Welcome and welcome back to our channel. How are you guys? Okay, so let me just honor the subscribers that we have. We are almost 3,000 subscribers, right? We are now 2,760, something like that, no? So thank you very much, and I really want to honor you. And my prayer is you will be given provision by our Lord and a blessing so that you can be able to bless others. All right. So today we will be continuing the discussion that we have with regards to Data Privacy Act of 2012. We are now in Chapter 3, or the processing of personal information. Okay. So Section 11, it says here that general data privacy principles, no? The processing of personal information shall be allowed subject to compliance with the requirements of this act and other laws allowing disclosure of information to the public and adherence to the principles of transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. So meaning to say, uh, meaning to say, the processing of information, no, personal information can be allowed, but uh, but it is limited, no, to the compliance of the requirements of this act, no, and other laws allowing disclosure of information to the public. So hindi rin basta-basta. Okay, so personal information, di ba? It says here personal information, no, shall be allowed. But on the next paragraph, it says here that personal information must be collected for specified and legitimate purposes determined and declared before, okay, and or as soon as reasonably practicable after collection, and later processed in a way compatible with such declared, specified, and legitimate purposes only. No, process fairly and lawfully. Letter C, accurate, relevant, and where necessary for purposes for which it is to be used. The processing of personal information kept up to date. Inaccurate or incomplete data must be rectified, supplemented, destroyed, or their further processing restricted. Letter D, adequate and not excessive in relation to the purposes for which they are collected and processed. Letter E, retain only for as long as necessary for the fulfillment of the purposes for which the data was obtained, or for the establishment, exercise, or defense of legal claims, or for legitimate business purposes, or as provided by law. No, so there is a limitation of that particular data to be retained. No, for example, it could it be retained? It could be retained by 6 months only. No, as long as okay na yung purpose nung data na yan. Okay. So for example, no, yung for example lang na data of a student, no, 4 years lang siya doon, no? 4 years lang. As long as nag-stay siya doon, and then after that, may mga limitation na, no, yung data releasing. Okay, letter F, kept in a form which permits identification of data subjects for no longer than is necessary for the purposes for which the data were collected and processed, provided that personal information collected for other purposes may lie processed for historical, statistical, or scientific purposes, and in cases laid down in law, may be stored for longer periods, provided further that adequate safeguards are guaranteed by said laws authorizing their processing. The personal information controller must ensure implementation of personal information processing principles set out herein. Section 12. Criteria for lawful processing of personal information. The processing of personal information shall be permitted only if not otherwise prohibited by law, and when at least one of the following conditions exist: that data subject has given his or her consent. Excuse me po. The processing of personal information is necessary and is related to the fulfillment of a contract with the data subject, or in order to take steps at the request of the data subject prior to entering into a contract. The processing is necessary for compliance with the legal obligation to which the personal information controller is subject. The processing is necessary to protect vitally important interests of the data subject including life and health. The processing is necessary in order to respond to national emergency, to comply with the requirements of public order and safety, or to fulfill functions of public authority, which necessarily includes the processing of personal data for the fulfillment of its mandate. The processing is necessary for the purposes of the legitimate interest pursued by the personal information controller or by third party or parties to whom the data is disclosed, except where such interests are overridden by fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject which require protection under the Philippine Constitution. Section 13, sensitive personal information and privileged information. Sensitive personal information, it refers to the personable identifiable information or the personable hospital information. No, the processing of sensitive personal information and privileged information shall be prohibited except in the following cases: the data subject has given his or her consent specific to the purpose prior to the processing, or in the case of privileged information, all parties to the exchange have given their consent prior to processing. The processing of the same is provided by existing laws and regulations, provided that such regulatory enactments guarantee the protection of the sensitive personal information and the privileged information, provided further that the consent of the data subjects are not required by law or regulation permitting the processing of the sensitive personal information or privileged information. Letter C, the processing is necessary to protect the life and health of the data subject or another person, and the data subject is not legally or physically able to express his or her consent prior to the processing. The processing is necessary to achieve the lawful and non-commercial objectives of public organizations and their associations, provided that such processing is only confined and related to the bona fide members of these organizations or their associations, provided further that the sensitive personal information are not transferred to third parties, provided finally that consent of the data subject was obtained prior to processing. Letter E. Haba, no? Letter E, the processing is necessary for purposes of medical treatment. Is carried out by a medical practitioner or a medical treatment institution, and an adequate level of protection of personal information is ensured. Okay, the processing concerns such personal information is as is necessary for the protection of lawful rights and interests of natural or legal persons in court proceedings or the establishment, exercise, or defense of legal claims, or when provided to government or public authority. Section 14, subcontract of personal information. A personal information controller may subcontract the processing of personal information, provided that the personal information controller shall be responsible for ensuring that proper safeguards are in place to ensure the confidentiality of the personal information process, prevent its use for unauthorized purposes, and generally comply with the requirements of this Act and other laws for processing of personal information. The personal information processor shall comply with all the requirements of this Act and other applicable laws. Extension of privileged communication. Okay, personal information controllers may invoke the principle of privileged communication over privileged information that they lawfully control or process, subject to existing laws and regulations. Any evidence gathered on privileged information is admissible. Okay, so that's chapter 3. Next time around, we will be dealing with chapter 4. Okay, chapter 4. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.